Good evening, everybody, and welcome once again to our Sunday night appointment. So for those who don't know me, my name is Francesca Romana d'Antuono. I am the city lead of Firenze and your host for tonight's live debate. So after the COVID-19 crisis accelerated more or less 1 month ago, we decided to start these appointments to tackle different aspects of the crisis, be they healthcare, economic or politics related. And welcome so today's topic is what's wrong with EU. We hope we made you laugh a little with this little play with the title, but tension really has escalated within the European Union in the past weeks. The crisis started with a complete lack of coordination between the member states. We discussed this in the first 2 episodes of the series, and with a couple of false steps, such as the declaration by Christine Lagarde about the spreads, those about Eurobonds by Ursula von der Leyen, and of course, all the dispute about sharing healthcare resources between member states, who at least at first really lack spirit of solidarity. This, of course, led to a rise in nationalist feelings and dangerously opened the door to perhaps economies and forces that would benefit from a non-united European Union, such as China or Russia, exacerbating these nationalist feelings in the first place. So today, we aim at understanding how the European Union institutions actually work as they are now. We believe there is a detachment between the EU and the European citizens who often don't know or are not aware of how it works. But moreover, we want to discuss how they should look like in the future in order to be more effective in time of crisis and perhaps also during normal times. So we're possibly living the so-called Hamiltonian moment, the moment where real integration within the Eurozone seems possible and, of course, needed according to economic logic, but perhaps national politics is making it harder. To discuss this, we have invited 4 experts in their own fields. We have tonight with us the pleasure to welcome Christy and Petit. Christy is a researcher associate at the Robert Schuman Center for Advanced Study. Thank you for being with us, Christy. Federica Bianchi, who is a journalist based in Brussels for L'Espresso. Michele Ballerin, who is an essayist and publicist and the former Vice-Secretary of the Union of European Federalists here in Italy. And Valerie Sternberg, the president of Europa. I remind you that you can ask questions at any time during the debate in the comments of this Facebook video you're watching. My beloved team will report them to me and I will be redirecting that to the guests. I hope everything is clear enough with my chit chat, and let's start actually by hearing our fabulous Christy speaking about European Union institution, ECB, and the wrong or miscommunication and the issue of trust in delivering results to European citizens. Christy, please.
Thank you very much. Hi, everybody, and thanks to the organizers for this online event. Welcome to all. I start indeed with one institution, the European Central Bank, which is an independent central bank in the EU, and we touch upon the more general EU institutional framework. So the ECB is an EU institution together with the 6 other EU institutions, which are the European Parliament, the European Council, the Council of the European Union, the European Commission, the Court of Justice of the European Union, and the Court of Auditors. In this EU institutional framework, the ECB has an exclusive competence for this monetary policy of the euro area member states. And since 2014, after the euro area crisis and the economic and financial crisis, the ECB is in charge of the supervision of the euro area big banks. In the current crisis that we're facing now, actually the expectations towards the ECB and the EU institutions more generally are much higher. And in my understanding, it's simply because during the last economic and financial crisis, they set up a higher standard of intervention. I will start with 2 simple observations. The first one is that there has been wrong or rather miscommunication in the past. And also this has been observed, as Francesca mentioned, during the COVID crisis. Christine Lagarde, president of the ECB, but also we have other examples on the table, made a small mistake in delivering the first package, which triggered reactions on the market immediately and by some governments, also in the media. But we need to understand that these measures lead to other measures the following weeks, and we need to put more emphasis on that. And they are already put into action with massive purchases on the market, which already took place. So let me say one thing that I observed is that the level of transparency and communication has significantly improved in the last weeks as compared to the last financial and economic crisis. And these channels are used by policymakers, are part of what is called accountability mechanism. And to define very simply what accountability means, it is to call and hold an institution to account for its measures. So it is a democratic control, which is very important to explain. This is the first element, so as to make a policy or measures understandable, but also to justify. And for me, justification is a bit different from explanation, because in justifying, you give the reasons why it is the right measure, why is it the right policy in a given situation. And in the last crisis, it was usually missing this element. What I could observe in the work I've done as a researcher is that you do have, after the last crisis, reinforced accountability practices which surpass the treaty requirements, especially for the ECB. So this is the main actor I'm looking at. But I could say, looking at during the last week, that you have a broader range of publications. Blog posts, interviews, frequent answers and questions, and back and forth between different measures and cross-references among institutions. I don't want to be naive, so I understand that once the packages are broadly known and explained, I still doubt, and this is where is my concern, that every citizen in the EU can grasp this justification or even the implementation of such measures. So this is where there's room for improvement. My second observation is that we tend to be rather confused in our own expectations between the short term and the long term, and also the difference between democratic institutions, so as the European Parliament, with some electoral cycles, and public administrations as the ECB, as an independent central bank. Nevertheless, all types of institutions must be held accountable for their results to ensure trust in their actions. And this is a question I'm going to ask now, and I'm going to try to have a bit of analysis and explanation on the current situation. Could we, and also how could we foster trust in these EU institutions, in particular to deliver results for us European citizens? This is a broad question, and I'm happy to have a debate afterwards. But trust means the reliability of the measures adopted by the EU institutions. Also, we expect that they are adequate. And besides this adequacy element, there's of course a more emotional and personal element. So also let me say, in comparison with what I said earlier, communication and transparency are important, but they are not sufficient, because by design they are top-down. They are given by the institutions which are delivering a message. And this is where it can go wrong, because the institution delivers the policy, action for message, and the message, as we have observed, might be totally inefficient if it is misunderstood. And in this scenario of misunderstanding, the EU institution has not delivered any results, despite of any policy action in the first place. So this is where I fear potential risk in the implementation or effects of all the measures which are adopted, because there would be a mismatch with the expectations, or even a misperception of what is actually done. Because we can observe over the last 3 weeks or even 4 weeks that we have actions on the tables with a torrent of measures, with figures, and it's just sometimes difficult to grasp. So the last thing I want to say is that we can put forward some measures to keep these institutions accountable and to observe the policies adopted and implemented. In the immediate, it is essential to keep the two things I mentioned in the definition of accountability, to explain, but also to justify what is adopted, what does it target, what is the expectation in the medium long term. From the citizens' perspective, it means that we also need to keep a permanent scrutiny over all institutions. So to keep demanding for more reporting requirements beyond usual practices, using diverse instruments and reaching all types of publics. And here, I think the role of the media, the experts, the academics, but also civil society organizations is really essential collectively. And then, indeed, Francesca was mentioning the difference between normal times and crisis times. In the accountability mechanism, usually you really put forward the necessity to involve civil society and the general public ex ante. So in the shaping and in the designing of the measures or the policies. Of course, in crisis time, such involvement is a bit lagging behind because of the urgency, and you end up having only few stakeholders at the table. So we have seen scientific experts with governments to examine the measures, some of the measures. I'm not saying it's wrong. It's just then essential, if we can't have this ex ante part, to reinforce the simultaneity of the explanation and justification now, and to have also probably more ex post accountability mechanism. So to conclude in a very few sentences, what we see as wrong today could maybe to some extent be seen as positive tomorrow. And why do I say that? It's that it seems to me that we have today much higher expectations towards the EU institutions than before. And this is where we can contribute to make their work evolve. So to have a bit of flexibility in the current framework and to set the standards for bigger changes overall. And here I'm thinking of the Eurogroup we are waiting for, like the measures we're waiting for on Tuesday with the fiscal policy. And yeah, by such demand that we exert towards the EU institution, we actually contribute in a way with a European public sphere, which is, in my opinion, much stronger and much more present than 10 years ago. So thanks for your attention, and I can't wait for the other speakers' remarks and the questions.
Thank you very much, Christy. You really gave us a lot of input for the discussion, which I'm not gonna reply, but I'm gonna leave the word to our other speakers or the audience to really tackle, because your intervention was very rich of inputs from my side. I believe that, and I thank you for that. Just wanted to make a point about what you said about time of reaction in time of crisis. I believe we were yesterday in the same Engaged Academics live on Instagram. Hello to our friends from Engaged Academics, and that was one of the points. So our capacity to react to this crisis from a political point of view as a union has really very much improved compared to 2008. Somebody would argue that the two crises are not comparable. Perhaps they're not, but still the speed in which we are reacting as a political unity is a lot higher. Meanwhile, I'm going to say hello to our friends connected from Hamburg, Copenhagen, Florence, and Bologna. Hello, thank you for being with us. And I'm going to leave the word in a second to our second guest, who is Federica Bianchi. Federica is a special envoy dealing with economics in Brussels, and perhaps she could give us her perspective about the North versus South controversy currently in place, or anyway, a general vision of this crisis from Brussels. Federica, it's on you.
Hi everyone. Can you hear me? Yes, I guess. Fantastic. I'm very happy to be with you. I will, as a journalist, I will speak about today about what's going on. One of the main issues is what are we going to do to support the recovery after the emergency over. First of all, how are we going to deal with the emergency altogether? And then how are we going to support the recovery? These two issues are, on the first issue, I should say, there is, as we said, as the previous people said, there is a broad consensus also between all the 27 members and the 19 members of the Eurogroup. People are on board, or they have got on board, even if a little bit later. And there are a lot of instruments that are out there and that the institutions have. So we mentioned the ECB, but we should also mention the EIB, the European Investment Bank. We should mention also the SURE, S-U-R-E, the new instruments, a new fund, which is a sort of unemployment insurance scheme that has been prepared these days by the Commission and should be approved next Tuesday by the Eurogroup, by the financial ministers of Europe. There is a lot of money going around for the emergency. Now, where the problem, and as you guys said, the timing of all that was quite quick for European standards in general, and more so compared to what happened during the financial crisis. So we can say that, yes, we have learned something from the financial crisis, especially in terms of reaction. The crisis is different, but we are dealing with people that, two things, we're dealing with people that die, and we are dealing with an enemy that nobody's responsible for. So that makes it easier to get support for everybody. But I think the major problem will be how we're going to do with the recovery once we understand in what kind of recession we're going to be, because for now it's only forecast, but nobody is really sure. And there is this problem of the 9 countries, for instance, that have asked to mutualize some debt, or at least the guarantees to be able to get some more debt at a very low interest rate. And the countries that are against that, in particular against any form of bonds, whether Corona bonds, recovery bonds, Euro bonds, but any kind of mutualized debt. And those countries are the famous Nordic country, meaning the Netherlands, Finland, but also Austria and Germany, which is the main country that so far hasn't really been on board and has got, I have to say, smaller countries to do the dirty job of speaking on the negative side. There, yes, we have a problem because I see that the France, Spain, Italy, Greece, they are speaking of Eurobonds in terms of solidarity. If we want to show that we are a union, and if we want to show our solidarity, we need to go ahead with these mutualized instruments. If we don't do that, then we risk to break the union, which is a point of these countries. The other countries, some other countries are saying, hey, wait a moment, we are not in favor of mutualizing the debt, and the treaties, including the 1992 Maastricht Treaty, they don't allow, they're actually against any sort of mutualization of the debt. However, during the financial crisis of 2012 and 2013, there was a new instrument, the MES for the Italians, that was built especially for emergency situations. We said we are not going to have a Greek situation again. We are not supporting a state in need in times of need. So now, yes, there is a crisis. Actually, it's more than one state who's going to need help. And so we have an instrument that is ready. Problem is, in southern countries, that instrument has become synonym of losing control of the fiscal instruments and some political means over one nation country. And so nobody wants to use it, especially Italy, but not only Italy. And in the north, they say, hey, why don't we see what we really need, what we want to achieve, and we use the instruments that are there. And then if they're not enough, we can either increase the amount of money that each instrument can bring, or we can think about new instruments instead of jumping immediately on the bandwagon of Eurobonds. So for me, this is very important because if we think about the future of Europe, we should take into consideration that Europe is a collection of states. It's still not one state. So the future of Europe must be something that is shared by all the 27 states and their governments. And we are not at a point yet. We are at a point where solidarity is a given, which is I think a huge step from 10 years ago. We are not at a point where mutualization of debt is something that everybody feels comfortable with. Why? One of the main reasons, and why, is because there are countries that want the treaties to be respected for many different reasons. I'll take a small country like the Netherlands. They complain that since the very beginning, France and Germany have not respected the treaties. And then later on, Italy, of course, and other countries have not respected the treaties. And so they feel like within this union, there are people that abide by the law and people that don't. And bigger states tend not to abide more than smaller states by the law. And that's a resistance, because then they have to justify, because since we are still a collective of states, they need to justify to their own parliaments, and that the governments need to justify to their own parliaments and their own citizens, why are we giving money, or why are we giving an insurance to other countries that have not respected the treaty. And that's sort of a reality. And then there are the southern countries that say, yes, we haven't, but at the same time, you're a breaker of other things, like for instance, one criticism is like fiscal paradises and tax havens in the northern countries. And there it comes to the problem. The problem is that we don't have a fiscal union. It's not in the treaties. It's something that's always been pushed forward. Why? Because every country has got a different level of economics and financial possibilities. We're not really all at the same level. So, but the lack of a common fiscal policies means that once that some countries can feel like they're making more sacrifices than others, that some countries have some laws that are more favorable to their tax laws, favorable to their citizens than others, and that makes the whole conversation ideological instead of pragmatic, instead of practical. So one of the things that should come out of this crisis, I think, is a point of convergence on fiscal rules and the conditions to have mutualized debt, also beyond the strict emergency. I don't know if I've taken too much time.
Thank you very much for your contribution, Federica. I really like the point about the fact that actually now we're more a collection of states than a real union. I think this is the whole point of this debate, because each state is responsible to their electors and to their citizen of their actions, and this is the lack. This was what causes the lack of unity in the first place. Also, I think it was a little bit attached to what Christy said at the very beginning about the miscommunication of what the union is responsible for and can or cannot do. But as said at the very beginning, the aim of today's live debate is also to discuss how we envision the union to be in the future. And in order to do so, I would like to leave the word to Michele Ballerin. Michele, does this union works as it is now?
Well, hello everybody. Thank you for your kind invitation. I think you know that I am a federalist, and well, I would say a federalist activist. And so I think that probably the best thing that I can do is trying to share with you what is the federalist point of view upon the European Union and what's wrong with it. And I wish to do that starting from the end, so to say. The main issue with the European Union, in my opinion, is that it is not a federation. And what does it mean concretely? Concretely, it means that currently in Europe, we have not a true common government. That's the question. Actually, when we talk about the European politics, nobody dares to talk about a European government. Everybody talks about a European governance, and governance is a very different word. Here in Italy, we talk about governance when we know that we can't talk about a government because there is not a European government, so we are forced to use the other word, governance. Well, and this is not a detail because it means that presently in Europe we have not the means to tackle the challenges of globalization, such as the present sanitary crisis, but as well as the economic and financial crisis that is going to come, and all the different kinds of crises that we know that we are going to face in the future. And well, actually, well, presently, the governance in the continent is managed by the European Council, and I will say that the true political government in Europe at the present is the European Council. Many people think that the Commission is the government of the European Union, but it's not true. What the Commission can do, according to the treaties, is to perform the tasks that the European Council assigns to it. Nothing more. But the treaties state very clearly that the political orientations in the European Union have to be decided within the European Council when, as you know, the national governments periodically meet in order precisely to decide upon the most important and vital political matters, such as the economic policy and the foreign policy, for instance. And the fact that the European Council is the institution which is more similar to a government, a political government in the European Union, causes at least two sets of problems. One, a lack of efficiency, and second, a lack of democracy, the so-called democratic deficit of the European Union. Well, the lack of efficiency is substantially due to the principle and the method of the unanimity voting. You know that within the European Council, the governments have to decide by means of this method, the unanimity voting, but that means that it is quite impossible to reach an agreement, especially on important matters where there are at stake vital interests of the states, and it means that every country in any moment can stop all the decision-making process within the council. So this is something really absurd. It is impossible to find a political scientist who would say that it is the correct way that an institution can work. And with respect to the lack of democracy, well, the problem is that the European Council behaves like a government, but is not responsible to any parliament, neither to the European Parliament nor to the national parliaments. And that means that the European Union is not working like a liberal democracy. The European Parliament can't dismiss the European Council. Theoretically, it can do that with the Commission, but as I've said, the Commission is not the political government of the EU, and the national parliaments neither can dismiss the European Council. Nobody can do it. So these are the main issues with the European Union, and I think that they are also the main reasons why a lot of an increasing number of European citizens are feeling so disappointed by the way the European Union works or doesn't work. Well, and how to fix these issues? This is the other important question. I don't know if I have 1 minute more to try to answer, or if you prefer that we will discuss this aspect afterward. Tell me what you prefer.
All right, thank you. Thank you for asking this. I would be fair to our last speaker and let her speak, and perhaps we can come back on this if you don't mind.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. It's okay.
All right. Thank you. Thank you. Very, very kind of you. I'm going to say hello to Volt Portugal and to our friends from Germany who I know are connected now. And I'm going to leave the word, as said, I want to be fair to all the guests, to a woman I really admire and I thank for being with us. Again, as the last point Michele made, one of the issues we really want to tackle is, all right, this is the current situation, but what's next? What can we do to change this? Is the European Union democratic? I don't know, Valerie, if you want to talk about that, but in general, what is the future of this union if we want to keep it together?
Yeah, thank you so much, Francesca, for the invitation, and it's so great to be here tonight and discussing this with all the other speakers. So I want to go 3 years back. Last weekend, Volt celebrated its 3rd birthday. And 3 years ago, we did not celebrate because 3 years ago, Article 50 was triggered. And with that, the process of the UK leaving the European Union. And as we all remember that, yeah, this event led to a deep crisis of European integration, which on a good note, mobilized citizens from everywhere in Europe to become active. It mobilized citizens to speak up for European values, for European unity and solidarity at a time when nationalism and populism was on the rise. So that was when Volt was born. And yeah, as everyone knows, Volt is a deeply entrenched pro-European party that has as its ultimate goal to protect and promote European values. But at the same time, we are very much also EU critic because we acknowledge that the 52% Brits that voted to leave 3 years ago or 3.5 years ago, and all the ones that turned away disappointed from the EU during or after the 2008 financial crisis have a point. And I'm sure that a lot of Italians and other Europeans can very much relate to that. So it is very obvious that there are things that need to change. But rather than giving up on our European community, we said we want to fix what's wrong and build on the foundations, build on what has ensured over 70 years of peace on our continent, has overall enhanced our European welfare, established a political entity that that the US is giving up its leadership for an open, multilateral global world and economy, is hoped to step up. So what we are and what we can build upon is a community of values that, if we fix it and do it right, has the potential to enable us to achieve our individual ambitions while being part of a strong community. And I zoomed out and went 3 years back because I think now, in a very different way, nevertheless, we are at a similar point. We are facing again a crisis of European solidarity and unity, this time caused by COVID-19, which polarizes us once more on the issue of European integration. They're the ones who favor closed borders and unilateral action, and the others who demand a coordinated European response. But I think no matter what side you're on, the majority seems to be united behind one question: where's Europe at times of crisis? And we realize now once again that European solidarity cannot be a one-way street. We are a union of 27 member states, and everyone shapes it, takes from it, but also has a responsibility towards it. And the union can only survive through commitment to be part of it in the good times as well as the bad times. So what we see is that this commitment is not absolute. It is more of a maybe, which works in good times because then it's okay. It seems to be working out all right. In bad times, however, it shows that with this attitude, we might not survive as a union. So I think we need to decide. Either we do it properly with a true European democracy, or we run risk that it falls apart and we fall back into unilateralism with individual nation states. And we should be very much aware of the consequences. So to go deeper into what you asked, Francesca, is so what's the status quo and what needs to change? It has been touched upon, but I'll try to do it in simple words. So let's start with the European Union, the legislative part of the European Union. So what we know as Parliament and the Council of the EU. So the European Parliament is currently directly elected, but its election modalities differ from country to country. So as Volt, we are very much aware of that. In Germany, we need 4,000 signatures to run for European elections. In Italy, 150,000 signatures. Everywhere it is different. The way we vote as citizens and under what and the conditions as a party or as an organization to run for elections. MEPs are usually elected at the national level, not locally, which means a big detachment between people and the European level. And on top of that, the system is of a digressive proportionality that denies us one citizen, one vote principle, which means that I think, I don't want to lie, so it's roughly that number, but in Malta, we have 65,000 people electing one MEP. In Germany, it's around 250,000. So national ministers are represented in the Council of the EU. That is kind of the other chamber where legislation runs through to be approved. And this chamber is made up of national ministers, and they often trump the legislative power of European Parliament. So as a consequence, some legislation is only passed if there is consensus among the national ministers. And then we have on top of that the European Council, which is actually not a legislative body, however, interferes quite regularly in day-to-day decision making. I think everyone is quite aware or has heard the name Eurogroup before. So that is our finance ministers, and the heads of state, and together they have quite a lot to say, especially in crises like this. So I think to sum it up, we can say that national egoisms shape EU decision-making a lot. So what needs to happen to change that? First of all, we need to reform the election of the European Parliament. we need a voting system that enshrines the principle one man, one vote, and combines the election of representatives at the lowest level possible with proportional representation. So luckily we have Damien in the European Parliament who's working on this in the AFCO committee. So European electoral law as a first step. We then have the council, as mentioned before, the body that is made up of the national ministers. We need to turn that council into a fully fledged legislative chamber, kind of a second chamber. In Italy, you know it quite well. You have two chambers as well. There it would be something like a Senate, and Germany it would be something like the Bundesrat. So in the long term, Volt strongly supports the further democratization of the council. So we have two really democratic bodies. And then I will make it short. The executive, we need to move from commissioners to ministers as an immediate measure, and in order to strengthen economic governance. So Federica spoke about Eurobonds. The issuance of Eurobonds will be bloody hard to coordinate without a position of a finance minister. So basically a European treasury. So we definitely need that if we want Eurobonds. So actually here again, a good choice, right? We cannot say we want the one but not the other. We need it together. And eventually that means that we need to establish a European democracy, a democracy where a prime minister is elected by and from the European Parliament, leads a federal cabinet of ministers, and guides the day-to-day policy work of the Union. I will very briefly touch upon fiscal and monetary policy, 1 minute, and then I hope I have given enough input for questions. So obviously, we need a European economic and financial system that works for all its citizens and for European society as a whole. So in order for that to work, we need to complete the Eurozone with institutions that create a better union for all its residents. And for that, we need fiscal and monetary institutions which are democratically legitimized. Federica also touched upon this with the ESM. It's an intergovernmental institution currently. It needs to be a European institution which is democratically legitimized. They need to act in accordance with our shared norms and are able to act in the interest of the Union as a whole, which too many people doubt, and this is why it doesn't work. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Valerie. A lot of very good points in my opinion. For those who are not aware, when she mentioned Damien, she's actually talking about Damien Boslager, Volt MEP elected last year. So you mentioned a European electoral law, the democratization of the council as a sort of second chamber, and the substitution of commissioners with actual ministers so they can actually implement the policies that we want to do, and which would be one of the main points when it comes to Eurobond, or at least this is my understanding. But if one of our guests want to say something about that, they're more than welcome to do so. But I would move to the questions which have started flowing in. So one of these would be, well, there was a comment before I spotted about the fact that it's not about countries being against Eurobonds, but it's the conditions you actually, well, like actually you make that happen. But a specific question arrived about what happened recently with the Prime Minister of Portugal, who said something very strong about the Dutch finance minister. He said something like, it was repulsive what he said, and the person who is asking this question, thank you for sending your question, is I'm curious to know how those words were received by the rest of Europe. I'm guessing it's someone from Portugal. He or she also said, personally, I think the pandemic situation could be a window for Europe to unify on a financial, political and military level. that may be undermined by some strong opinions on the southern countries. My question is, does Europe have the tools to take advantage of this dire situation? If not, what needs to be done towards it? I believe Valerie partially replied to that, but I don't know if perhaps, Michele, this could be linked to the last points you wanted to make, or whoever else wants to reply, just unmute yourself and feel free to speak.
Well, yes, I think, as many other things, that this crisis is also a big opportunity with respect to the possibility to go ahead with the process of the European integration. And well, I'm quite sure that in the next days we will see very interesting things in the European politics. Many things are possible. About how to make the European Union work better. I think that the only way would be by changing the treaties, and in any case by going beyond the current treaties. It is impossible to think that something really will change without an institutional reform. I think that this is the true issue on the table. Even if many prefer don't look at it and don't mention it, but this is the real and the true issue. With respect to the parliament, I think that the main problem is that the European Parliament, if we want to talk about European democracy, the European Parliament currently has not all the powers that a parliament should have, and particularly it has no powers in fiscal policy and in foreign policy as well. So I think that we should start thinking of a reform in order to give the Parliament and the Commission too these powers. It would be the first thing. Another thing to change is that we absolutely have to abolish the unanimity principle in decision-making process in the European Union, especially within the Council of the EU and the Council of the National Ministers. And I perfectly agree with Valerie when she said that it should work as a second chamber of the Parliament. That would be precisely the correct way it should work. A third point is that we absolutely need to increase the European budget, because presently we have not the resources that would be required to face and to manage the sanitary and economic crisis we are trying to tackle. And well, the European budget has two problems. It is not independent from the national states, because it mainly depends on the contributions by the single governments, and it is insufficient with respect with its amount, because at the moment it's barely the 1% of the gross domestic product of the European Union as a whole. Well, it's less than 1%, and it's really something ridiculous, because it's absolutely not enough. It should be at least 5% of the GDP, of the European GDP. And fourth, also, it would be required to give the European Union the competence in defense policy. And this is an issue which goes along with the problem of the foreign policy, because you can't conceive a foreign policy which has not behind it a military force. It wouldn't make sense, and vice versa. You can't think of for example, of a European army if you can't have a foreign policy, because you can't have you have not an institution which is able to take decisions in this matter. If you have an army but you have not a foreign policy, you have not the means to decide how to spend and to use this army. No? So I think that these are four essential issues that must be part of the reform of the institution that we absolutely should start considering right now, from now, without waiting for that this crisis has ended. The problem is that if you every time wait for the crisis is passed before to talk about institution reform in Europe, the problem is that you want to ever this reform, because you will be always tackling some crisis. I think that it is important. We think that we consider that the future is going to be a continuous succession of crises for us.
Yeah, that's I agree with you with that. Like, this is extraordinary situation, but planning is about extraordinary situation. So there was Federica asking to also talking about this. If you don't mind, I'll let her jump in a second, and then we can move. Federica. Yes. All right, perhaps she's not ready. All right, well, Federica, when you're ready, you'll let us know. I would like to move
I'm actually ready. I think
there was a
problem with the microphone.
All right.
It was on, but it was off.
All right.
I'm here. What I'm trying to say, what I would like to say is that we are talking about, what we would like, especially all people that are in favor of a united Europe would like, is a list of desire more than a list of real projects. And I think we need to think in more pragmatic terms, not only in terms of what we would like, but what is possible to do now, what can be done in the short term, in the medium term, and in the long term. Because in order, I agree with Michele that we need to change the treaties, but changing the treaty, as many people know, it's not an easy thing to do. Why is not easy to do? Because you need the approval of national governments and national parliaments. Now, right now, the European Union is not in a position, the European Union citizens are not all in a position of giving a green light to their governments to change the treaties. So this is not, it's something that should be done, could be done, no, should be done, but could not be done. What can be done actually is to strengthen the cooperation between countries and the trust. Now, trust, somebody already mentioned the problem of trust. Trust is a big thing. Today, there is no trust among the 27 and even less among the 19th of the Eurozone. Many countries don't trust other countries and vice versa. And without trust, then you can't build, you can't change anything, you can't change treaties, you can't move forward. So how do you build trust? I think some of it goes through communications, but a lot of it also goes through working together to find solutions. And so that's why the crisis offers an opportunity, because it offers a moment where people get together to find a concrete solution for a concrete problem now, and then they move a little bit forward, hopefully, towards a common union. The only thing is that we shouldn't think that the solution that we are working towards is immediately what some countries would like. Is always going to be a compromise, and is always going to be a little bit less. And I think also the media play a role in all of that, because people should be aware that certain things are just not like need more time and need more work and need more pragmatism, simply because they are not in everyone's interest. And the Eurobonds are a perfect example of that. And I'll tell you more. One of the things that I'm talking to a lot of people these days, and one of the things that's coming out is Eurobonds will be approved, or some sort of bonds, once the countries that are against feel like they're going to be also in their interest. When they feel like that the Eurozone is really on the brink of disaster, which is not as of today, and then maybe because it's in their interest to have a strong union, in their economic interest, in their trade interest to have an economic union, then they will move forward and they will be able to convince citizens. I'm just saying that because otherwise, yes, we can say whatever we want. We want one Europe, we want one army, we want one parliament, we want the upper chamber, the lower chamber, we want the commissioners to be ministers, we want a real finance minister for all of Europe, but it's not going to happen because, as I said, you need a treaty to make it happen. Sorry.
If I can just jump in here, Francesca. So I think there's some great things that that my previous speaker said where I think, build upon. I think, first of all, what Federica just mentioned on like solutions are actually being found at times of crisis, and then we can move from there to institutionalize that into a larger picture. And I think there Eurobonds versus Corona bonds is an important thing, because I think they sometimes get mixed up, but they are very different, because Corona bonds are actually a very pragmatic compromise and solution to the impact of the crisis, the economic impact of the crisis, while Eurobonds will be an institutionalized fiscal measure, which will take much longer to find that compromise within the EU. And I think this is why I hope that with the Corona bonds we will be moving ahead, which are a large one-off joint debt issuance to counteract the economic damage caused by COVID-19, which are guaranteed jointly by all the member states. And this is why all member states actually have an interest to issue such a debt, because such a mutual debt, because every single member state will be hit in a very strong way by COVID, and will suffer the consequences of it. So as opposed to the large crisis, we're actually talking about a symmetric shock here, not an asymmetric shock. And this is why I think there is a pragmatic solution, especially inside. So I think the trust issue here, if we talk about these type of measures, there was a question regarding trust between North and South, especially with regards to Eurobonds, might be less of an issue. However, I agree that when we then move into institutionalizing something like Corona bonds or then Eurobonds, then trust becomes a much larger issue. So do we find a shared agreement on how we manage our budgets, what is sustainable debt levels, and so on? These are then issues that need to be tackled.
Thank you to all the speakers for your consideration. There are a lot of consideration upcoming about how do we make this need of a more united union understandable to citizens. So there is somebody from the UK listening. Hello to our friends from the UK who is saying that these are all good points, but the problem would be to persuade citizens rather than their representative that the European Union integration is a good thing, and why. I would like to hear Christy's perspective on this, because I think you deal a lot with, understanding how the institution works, but you also mentioned a sort of misunderstanding between what happens really and what is communicated then to the general public. I don't know if you want to give your thoughts about this, Christy.
Yes, sure, exactly, because this is another level of trust. Sorry, I forgot to put back the camera. Hey there. So this is different level of trust. Exactly, the previous speakers mentioned the trust among the member states to move forward with some measures. And indeed, in my introductory remarks, I was more talking about the citizens aspect. And I think it's very important, and that's what I was trying to express, is that if you have demand coming from the electorate, this will also push the governments to act. Because governments, I mean, head of states and head of governments, they have their short-term perspective about being elected again. And okay, they are working in an intergovernmental setting, but in this perspective, it's a bottom-up push. So, and how do we persuade citizens? So exactly, so then we are coming back to the other level of how to explain the measures and justify them. So I stayed rather at the general level, but this is where I think we need to have a more comprehensive approach, like explaining, because you have a piecemeal approach for now. You have some measures or packages in terms of investments, you have a bit of help for workers, but as social policies are national competence, then it's fragmented. You have some investment funds, but it's rather limited, trying to allocate some EU budget. So indeed, all these steps, if you put them together and then you push for more, what the previous speaker said with Eurobonds or Corona response, then you can explain and persuade the citizens that it's necessary and it's a collective responsibility. What I could say also is that not only explaining, but justifying and trying to be understandable, because again, sometimes I'm listening to very interesting analysis, but I'm in the field, I'm an expert, I'm reading a lot about this, I've written a thesis and so on and so forth. But when I tried to approach trust earlier, I also said there is an emotional and personal element. And this is a sense of belonging. And you have mistrusts at the national level, so we can... We need to imagine on some reflect upon some mechanism to work on this trust at the European level. And this is where transnational organizations, transnational parties and groups are important. Understanding, questioning, answering. I know this is very broad, this is very general, but I mean, if we are talking about, for instance, our grandma, who is actually thinking, but why would it be important today to do these things together? So then to give concrete example.
All right, thank you very much, Christy. I don't know if any of the other speakers would like to comment on this, because we're really receiving a lot of questions about really how to communicate this. I'm guessing this is because our public tends to be pro-European, but we want to get out of our comfort zone and really try to reach people who perhaps have some doubts about the fact that the European Union is a positive thing. I strongly believe that we should not forget them or just label them as ignorant or stupid or stuff. How do we reach people that don't believe that this is fair to citizens? And I'm asking this to Federica as a journalist, to Valerie as a politician, and of course to Michele as a sort of in between, because you have both profiles in a way. Whoever wants to go first, please unmute and go.
Okay. Well, I think it's great that you invited people from such different fields, because I think there is not one solution. I think we actually have to work across fields, and everyone has their responsibility to make that, well, to get that discourse in the public, and to talk with people and make them understand what the questions are, what the challenges are, and how we can tackle it together. And I think I can probably mainly speak from German perspective in the sense that how I see the current crisis. And while I completely agree with what previous speakers have mentioned, that crises are always can always offer a way forward, because they force us to decide. Like what I said earlier, our national leaders, who are very much the decision makers in the European Union, are in the end the ones that decide whether we do it together and if we don't. And the commitment doesn't seem to be strong enough. However, what I can observe right now is that even opposition parties who would be pushing much more, for instance, for a German that acts in solidarity, they're keeping silent right now, because in a crisis also, you don't want to be the one that is criticizing, because everyone knows that it's tough and that decision making at times of crisis is a hard thing. So even opposition parties are not bringing let's say the European Union into discourse and what solidarity means to us. So I think here I actually see a huge urgency for political actors like Volt to do this, and to also go beyond crisis communication. So to not only say, yes, we are Corona bonds, this needs to happen now, but to actually offer a picture that already is that goes beyond that goes beyond the crisis, and that zooms out and shows why solidarity and unity is important, and why as a team we can get much further in Europe than by ourselves. So I think here Volt and others need to be way more vocal. I think we have been the same as other political parties in that we are insecure, we are unsure how to communicate, but I think nothing can go wrong with a constructive type of discourse, with making constructive arguments, not necessarily criticizing in the types of crisis, but trying to offer a vision, an outlook, and solutions that make everyone feel better, and perhaps can even inspire politicians that are currently in charge.
Thank you, Valerie. Very nice. I also believe, as you do, in commission of forces. We have been invited to this live debate also people from other parties, because we believe this is everybody fight. This is not our specific fight, but we want to collaborate with other forces. Speaking of which, I would leave the word to one of the two other speakers. Whoever wants to go, please unmute and just go.
Okay, I will go, and I think there are two ways. Speaking of communication, the first one, I think, the main way is the creation, which is already happening, and we have seen it with the recent European elections. But the creation of a European space, political space, public space. So no longer a national space where people speak and confront themselves, but they confront themselves at a European level. That means that politicians that speak different languages, for instance, they should go and speak to people of another country. We are seeing that a little bit happening, as I said, during European elections, when Timmermans, which is a Dutch, was speaking in German, and then he was speaking to the Germans, in Italian to the Italians. We have seen a politician like an Italian politician like Matteo Renzi speaking French to the French. We have seen a Belgian like Verhofstadt speak again in Italian to the Italians. And a lot of this. And this, I think, should go on, because people need to hear directly, since we don't have a European Parliament yet, but to induce people to want a European Parliament, we need to create the need of a European Parliament, a place where people can actually speak to people of another country, which won't no longer be perceived as foreign, but as part of the same community. Because if you don't feel part of the same community, then you don't have the tendency of, you know, include others in moment of need. I mean, you do more as charity on an intellectual level than you do on an instinctive way. So that's the first thing, and I think the media should do it. I think the politicians should do it. We all have a say, and we could all be responsible in that. And then the other thing is that every single time when somebody presents his or her own reasons for wanting to achieve something, should keep in mind also what the other people have to gain from that, and the other point of view, which is difficult, not so much because people are self-centered, but because you need to study and you need to know what is in the interest of other people, and how you need to explain things through the lenses of somebody else. So if you want to put forward a position like, now we need a common parliament, or we need a finance minister and all that, then you need to show other people what they would have to gain at a very pragmatic level, very simple level, like me as a citizen, me as a person, my family, my children, my relatives. I think this is not so much done. Sometimes, especially pro-European parties and people, they feel like they're in the right, and they stay at a higher level, like a more intellectual level, instead of going down to the arena and putting themselves in other people's shoes, meaning in other European people's shoes.
Thank you, Federica. I strongly agree with you. That was my very first point. We really should try to understand what is going on with people at ground level, not at like all academic and intellectual level. Michele, I'm gonna ask you to be super brief because we're running out of time. So please.
Okay, very shortly. I think that it is not mainly a problem of communication. I think it is mainly a problem of facts. I think that people, European people, need to see a European Union which is able to govern the processes, to act. And this is impossible if the European Union goes on with its intergovernmental method of governing itself. I can only repeat what I said before. You can achieve this goal only by means of an institutional reform. And with respect to the problem of the political will to do that, which was mentioned by Federica before, I just can say that the political will is a very volatile element. It changes very fast. And today, a government say no, absolutely no to the Eurobonds, for instance. But if something very heavy and dangerous happens tonight, tomorrow, we can be sure that he will change his mind. So I think that we are living a moment when many things are possible.
Thank you, Michele. Actually, you opened to me a whole new discussion, but we are running out of time, as said, and it seems like our time is over. Before closing, I want to thank all of our guests for having been with us. So thank you, Federica, Valerie, Michele, and Christy. I want to also thank my amazing team for having worked with me in making this possible. Giovanni Cannizzo, Pietro Massai, Lorenzo Stefani, Giorgio Tosco, Ginevra Detti, Gabriele Maone, and Lorenzo Mancini. All of the others who have helped us with this, I'm referring to Val Brescia team in the person of Fulvio Berardi, Val Denmark, who is a great support in the person of Katrin Richter, and many more, which I unfortunately don't have time to mention, but this is really, this is great. We really hope you are enjoying our weekly appointments and are making treasure of it, meaning that we really want to start a conversation to understand where this crisis can lead us. Of course, our hearts and souls are with those who are suffering at the moment. In this big time of crisis, we believe we should not back down, but instead understand our times and really make the best out of it. A small information before closing: we will not be on air next Sunday, the 12th of April, but we will be back on the 17th of April. Next appointment will be about the threat to human rights and to democracy that this COVID-19 crisis may be causing. We're thinking, of course, about Mr. Orban, whose first act as soon as he acquired full powers in Hungary was against the right of transsexual people. We will, of course, tell you more during the following weeks about this, but please reach out to us via Facebook, Instagram, or email, or however you want to do that, if you want to contribute or participate or simply give us input. I wish you a very good night, and remember that united we stand, divided we fall. See you on the 17th of April. Thank you for having been with us.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Francesca.
Thank you.
Still your best practice.